Good afternoon. I would like to thank you for being here today for my presentation on addressing the manufacturing skills gap for PAPA 6224 policy design. Today we're going to discuss addressing the manufacturing skills gap that is currently going on in our country. The manufacturing industry is experiencing a labor shortage due to a skills gap. 45% of jobs between 2004 and 2014 will be middle-skilled jobs, and 40% of open manufacturing positions require some post-secondary training. So why would a manufacturing skills gap be important to us in public policy? Is that if manufacturing is seeing a skills gap, then we're not competing the way that we should with other nations globally. This is really a national issue, not just a manufacturing issue. Some people would say, well, we've just gone through a recession, and so there shouldn't be a gap in positions. There shouldn't be a gap in the hiring for manufacturing, but there is. The gap exists because the positions of today in manufacturing are going more towards positions that are more highly advanced and technology-based. So people that have typically had positions in manufacturing tend to be more low-skilled and uneducated, and they're not filling the gap. They're not able to fill those positions just because they don't have the educations and skills required to do those new jobs in advanced manufacturing. So what we're saying today is that federal workforce investment programs, they must revamp to assist in addressing this issue. And honestly, this is not just an issue that exists in manufacturing, but this issue actually exists in a lot of our industries here in our country. But today we'll talk more specifically about manufacturing. But just keep in the back of your mind that this skills gap issue of having a pool of individuals who need employment but don't have the skills or education, and then a pool of jobs where employers and industries can't find individuals to fill the positions because there are no skilled and trained individuals in those fields. That creates the gap that we're talking about in manufacturing with the skills gap. And there's several major stakeholders when we talk about the manufacturing skills gap. The manufacturing industry, federal legislators, current workforce investment programs, community colleges, and job seekers. Why would the manufacturing industry be a major stakeholder in this issue? Well, obviously, they are the ones that are unable to fill their positions. So they are a stakeholder. It will be very important to them to be on the forefront of helping to address this issue, because they are not able to address this alone. As they have tried to and have been trying for the past several years, they are unable to address their skills gap. So they would want to be involved in the discussion and the planning on how we address this gap. Federal legislators are going to want to be major stakeholders and are major stakeholders because if individuals, it's twofold. If you have companies that are unable to find a skilled workforce, again, we can't compete globally as a nation. And so those companies may do things like go overseas so that they can find more skilled and trained individuals, or just close down because they're unable to keep up with competitors across seas. And so if they close down, that creates an unemployment issue, and that in turn becomes an issue for federal legislatures. Current workforce investment programs need, as we said earlier, need to be at the forefront of this discussion, because workforce investment programs are here to get people back to work. And currently not just back to work, but into careers. And we'll talk a little bit more in depth about what current workforce investment programs are out there, but they want to be at the table. Now, traditionally, you haven't had community colleges involved in workforce investment programs nationally, except in that you do have some people who participate in training. But you really want community colleges and training providers at the table and in this discussion, because they need to be involved in helping to shape what those training programs look like that will get our low-skilled workforce geared up, trained, and skilled for our manufacturers. And of course, job seekers are major stakeholders, and they may not even realize that this is an issue, but although our unemployment rate has been slightly decreasing over the last few years, we have been faced with a major recession. And because of that recession, we do have individuals who are unemployed, some who are still unemployed, and as they continue to not gain skills and training, they will continue to go through this cycle. An individual who has a background in manufacturing as we know it, they may have experience working as a picker or a packer or on a manufacturing line. If they're not able to go into one of these new facilities and work with this technology, then in the long run, they will find themselves unemployed. So they are also major stakeholders, whether they are aware of it or not. Now, when looking at the skills gap and thinking about the workforce investment programs of the past, you have the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act of 1973, the Job Training Partnership Act of 1982, and the Workforce Investment Act of 1998. If you look at research, most people will tell you, or most research will tell you, that these programs have been ineffective. The Comprehensive Employment and Training Act of 1973 was phased out, and Job Training Partnership Act was phased in so that they could decentralize the program. They wanted to decentralize. It was heavily federal focused and federally ran, so they wanted that to be decentralized, and a lot came out about corruption and mismanagement of the program, so they wanted to do away with that program. The Job Training Partnership Act touched some on training, but there was not a focus of industry sectors. So you had individuals being trained, but you didn't specifically have them being trained in high growth areas where there were definitely jobs. So an individual could walk off the street and want training and want the help, and they may very well go to school, but it may be in a career field that was declining or nearly non-existent. And then came the Workforce Investment Act of 1998. Now, the whole goal behind the Workforce Investment Act was to create a one-stop shop where individuals could come to one location and receive all of the needs. Now, ideally, all of your partner agencies, from addressing homeless services, needing food, any barriers that you could address, vocational rehabilitation, your unemployment insurance, all of those, ideally all of those partners would have been located in one place. This has not happened. You do have a lot of the one-stops that have partnering and co-location of partner agencies, and job seekers and customers are benefiting from that. But in an ideal world where everybody's in one place and a customer doesn't have to go back and forth across town to receive services, that has not happened. You do have a bigger focus on training people in areas of high growth and in industries where there's a rise in employment. But the piece that's missing and that they're trying to work on is that piece of including your training providers and really shaping a program where you involve businesses, you involve training providers, and everyone, including workforce investment programs, are at the table to help make decisions and shape how the program is developed. From the beginning, the Workforce Investment Act said that businesses and job seekers were both customers of the One Stop, but actually seeing that through to fruition has not been the case in a lot of places across the country. So, but you need businesses at the table along with community colleges, because again, you may be training someone in a 2-year program, and it may be in the right career path, but if they are not, if it's taking them 2 or 3 years to finish the training, and these businesses need someone in 6 months with these skills, that exactly is not happening in most cases. So they all need to come together to build and shape good programs that can be successful for manufacturing and other industries. So that's an overview of the 3 workforce investment programs that have been on the table in the last few years. When looking at this issue, I looked at several criteria. I looked at inclusion of career pathways and sector strategy programs, a training focus, business involvement, the amount of time until benefits are seen, workforce expertise, flexibility in programming, meaning a low amount of bureaucracy and cost. These are all criteria that would be included in determining, is this a feasible direction to go in with addressing the manufacturing skills gap? Why were these criteria chosen? Inclusion of career pathways and sector strategies. A big movement across the nation in the past 5 years has been career pathways and sector strategies. Career pathways bring workforce and education together to build programs that can address some of these skills gaps. In a lot of cases, they do include business. In some cases, they do not, but they definitely sit education and workforce development down at the same tables to address this issue. Having a training focus. Any new legislation, any new programming would have to have a training focus to address the manufacturing skills gap, because the big issue is that individuals are not trained appropriately for the next career path in manufacturing. You need business involvement, because if businesses are not at the table to tell you exactly what they need, then you could be going in the wrong direction with the training, or what direction you're leading job seekers and how you're developing programming. So it's very important that business is not just seen in the picture as, okay, well, we know eventually we want our job seekers to get employment, but we want businesses at the table as a partner. So any program or policy change that occurs needs to have business involvement. The amount of time until benefits are seen. Honestly, we do not have 15 or 20 years to address this skills gap. We have to start addressing our industries right now, and the quicker that this can be done, the better. Because again, this is an issue where our businesses in the United States are not able, in a lot of cases, to compete globally. So this is an issue of today, not something where we can say, well, in 50 years we'll see the benefits, or in 25 years we'll see the benefits. We need to see benefits in a year, 2 years, 5 years, which is really a long time off. Workforce expertise. We want to, in some of the research and writings out there about the workforce investment programs, there's a lot of talk about just doing away with the workforce programs. Well, you don't want to completely, it's like saying you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. There are some good things happening in the workforce investment programs, but we don't want to lose all of that expertise that is already there, but we want to build on what we have. And we definitely want to have flexibility in programming. One of the complaints from business is the amount of bureaucracy. Businesses don't deal, I'm a workforce development professional. I have always worked with federal or state programs. So I'm used to the bureaucracy. Businesses are not used to bureaucracy, and it's going to take 6 months to get this program taken care of and to get the people that you need. They don't understand all of those pieces. And honestly, sometimes those pieces are not necessary. So we need to ensure that we have as limited amount of bureaucracy as possible. The other criteria would be cost. Now, recently we went through something where the government, Congress, wanted to zero out funding for workforce investment. If anything, we want to increase funding for workforce investment, but we know that we have our debts is increasing nationally, and so really we need to look at reduced spending. And so how can we get to the end game and spend less money? What is the cost to run these types of programs? And so what are our policy alternatives? If what we listed previously, those are our criteria, what types of alternatives do we have for policy development? Well, we could develop a new federal job training program. It's been done in the past. We could definitely do that. That's an option. We could revamp current programming, including career pathways and sector strategies, taking what we have and including some of the good things that are coming out of career pathways and making that work. We could look at K-12 vocational strategies. When you look at the research, we are not competing. One of the other pieces that's coming out of research is that our youth coming out of high school are not on the same playing field as youth coming out of high school in other countries. So maybe the answer is to ramp up K-12 vocational strategies. We could just give training dollars to businesses. That's an option. The businesses know where their needs are. We just give them all of the money and say, you train up the people that you want to train up, and we handle it that way. And then we could do nothing. Do nothing is always an option. Maybe not always the viable option, but it's always an option. And so in addressing the manufacturing skills gap, what we have here are our criteria on the top row, and then our policy alternatives on the left-hand side. And I've numbered and labeled every single category so that we can see where we stand with each of the alternatives. If you can see on the screen, well, the 5 has a higher, the 5 is higher, the 1 being weaker. So we say career pathways inclusion being the first policy alternative, a new program would be a 5, whereas time and expertise you would have a 1, which means those with a new program you may lose the time and expertise. So that's how that kind of shapes out. So when we look at that, we find that a program with training focus, we see a lot of 5s and then a 3 in that category, so that's a fairly good option. And then we have career pathways inclusion. We also have some high numbers there. And so after all of the research and laying out the matrix, the conclusion that I came up with in the recommendation is to revamp the current Workforce Investment Act programs, including career pathways and industry sector programs targeted at industry sectors. And that's the conclusion of my presentation. Do we have any questions?
Hey, Valerie, I do have a question for you. Because workforce development is kind of new to me, I just wanted to know, why should we even be concerned about the manufacturing skills gap?
That's a good question. Even when you look at some of the research, there's questions about, should we be concerned with the manufacturing skills gap? Shouldn't that be manufacturing industry's issue? And it is the manufacturing industry's issue. But we should be concerned as a nation and as citizens even with the manufacturing skills gap, because if this continues and they're unable to fill those open positions, thus unable to produce product and get that shipped out and make money, those businesses can close down. We've already seen a huge shift in manufacturing companies leaving the United States and going overseas because labor is cheaper overseas in a lot of cases. And so we've already seen that shift. And with that shift, we've seen multitudes of job seekers left unemployed, individuals who have been in the same careers for 20, 30, 40 years, who thought they were going to retire from these places, and the only skills that they had were the skills they gained that on-the-job training with little or no education and training. And they're left here unemployed, unskilled, uneducated, and not to any fault of their own. 20 years ago, you could go into a job and think that you'd retire from there 30 or 40 years from then if you were hardworking, you were able-bodied. That's not always the case today. So we want to be concerned, because as those companies, if this is not addressed and they don't do well and they end up shutting down, then the concern will be our unemployment rate. Are we able to compete globally? Income, all of the income generated by those businesses, we need that for our country to run. So we should be very concerned about the manufacturing skills gap.
You talked a lot about what research shows. Is there any additional research that should be done on this topic?
I think there is additional research that should be done on the topic. There are a lot of papers out there on the career pathways. There are a lot of good things going on in career pathways. And there is some research on workforce investment programs and if they've been effective, more so on JTPA, the Job Training Partnership Act, than Workforce Investment Act. There should be more research done on Workforce Investment Act and its outcomes, and there should be more research done on the career pathways and the outcomes and effects of career pathways. Another one of the changes that we saw with the Workforce Investment Act was the inclusion of performance measures into the programs. So there should be a lot of data out there to tell us, are people being successful in these programs? And so research on those programs, along with the feasibility of how they can affect those programs together, how they can affect the manufacturing skills gap would be very useful and resourceful to this discussion.
Thank you. I just have one more question. Those policy alternatives that you were speaking about, are any of those being considered by policymakers?
So right now, we've been going through for probably the last 5 or 6 years discussion on doing away with Workforce Investment Act. The Workforce Investment Act is actually not reauthorized at the moment. So what they keep funding the Workforce Investment Act on continuing resolutions, and they fund it that way. So there has been a lot of talk, like I said, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, there was discussion about completely eliminating out Workforce Investment Act funding. And so those discussions are in place. So the new programs, that was one of the alternatives, that's currently being discussed. There is some discussion about revamping Workforce Investment Act and career pathways. I haven't heard a lot about the K-12 or giving businesses the money directly.
Okay, that's all I have for you.
Well, thank you for your questions and your time. If you have any other questions, please contact me, and I'd be glad to have a discussion with you about addressing the manufacturing skills gap. Thank you.